Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be using a new product called Build FX by UResin. It is a two-part resin putty that you can create texture on artwork and various pieces. But today I'm going to be using this on a upcycle vase project. Now this is available in Australia, so I'll leave links in the description box below for those. So the first thing I want to do is weigh the product. So I'm just using a set of scales and a plastic lid as a palette, and I'm going to mix equal parts of part A and part B. And as you can see, it's already like a putty consistency, so we're just going to mix those together. It's quite satisfying pulling this apart. I actually quite enjoy that part, so I thought I'd leave it in the video just for you. And because I've not used this before, I'm just going to try mixing small amount first. So I'm just going to do 10 grams of part A and 10 grams of part B, and then I'm just going to make sure that I knead it properly to make sure that it's fully blended. Now the recommended time for mixing is 2 minutes, so I've set my timer on 2 minutes to make sure that I mix it correctly. So I'm speeding up the video a little bit here because you don't need to see me in such detail mixing these together. So I found it quite tough to mix at first because it's really thick, and at first I was finding it difficult to know if I'd mixed it thoroughly, because once the colour had blended it was hard to know if it was fully mixed. So I did mix for the full 2 minutes. So the next time I'm applying the texture to the vase. So what I'm doing is I'm starting at the top and I'm going to work my way around and have it high on one side and low on the other. So I've started with the top area and then I'm just flipping the vase around, and then I'm going to place the lower edge down the bottom, just so that I've then got somewhere to work, so that I know that it looks equal on both sides when you rotate the vase. So as you can see, I'm just applying it to the bottom of the vase, and then I'll join up the two so that we've got a nice curve moving, sweeping up around the vase. So now what I'm doing is I'm finding a center point between the two areas where I've already applied the texture, and in a sweeping motion with a palette knife I'm adhering the texture to the vase. Now as you can see, I'm not doing a straight line, I want it to have a nice curving motion, and then I'm just going to just move it around and join those areas up. Now I want to make sure that the texture is well adhered to the vase, so I'm just applying a bit of pressure and then pulling the palette knife across the surface to get that texture off the palette knife and get it sticking to the vase. I don't think there'll be any issues with this texture sticking to the vase, but I just want to make sure that I've got plenty on there and that it doesn't peel off once it's cured. And again, I'm going to add a little bit more texture around the back, and then I'll keep going around till I've got the thickness of the texture on the vase, because I wanted to have a bit of a contrast between the rough surface of the vase and the texture, because the texture I found tends to smoothen out a little bit, so it starts leveling off a little bit, so you get nice rounded edges, so you don't get any sharp or rough areas with the texture. So I'm going to continue round all the way around until I've got a nice sweeping line right the way around the vase, and then I'll just continue to add more as we go around, just to make sure that there's plenty on there, because I want to have a nice contrast, like I say, between the varying textures, but also I'm going to be adding contrasting colours, and I want there to be a nice definition between the two colours. I'm just going to keep going around and adding more texture until I feel that there's enough on there to give me the desired effect. So now that the texture has been applied, I'm now using my finger to start creating some additional lines and movement. So in a wavy pattern, I'm pulling the texture out to the edges and smoothing it out to the edges, but also creating some extra ridges and lines in the texture so that when we come to do the paint later, we can see a nice definition of texture. And I'm just going to go around, keep going around and pulling the texture around until I've got some nice creative lines. And also where the edges are, I'm smoothing them out a little bit so that we've not got a hard line. I find this part to be quite satisfying, just moving the texture around, because I really like using my hands to get into pieces. I feel like it's putting a little bit of me into that piece. Now I left this secure for a couple of hours and I've now come back and it's touch dry, so this means that I can start painting. It's not fully cured yet, but I can move my fingers and it's not creating any extra divots or texture there, so I'm now going to apply the paint and let that dry overnight. So for this I'm just using some black acrylic paint. It's not watered down or anything, it's straight out of the tube, and I'm now applying this to the bottom areas. As you can see, I've turned the vase upside down and I'm going to apply the paint. Now you don't need to paint the bottom like I have here, it's just that I like to finish it off that way. So I'm going to apply the black paint and then do it on one side of the texture. The other side of the texture I'm going to do something different with. So once again, I'm just speeding up this process here because you don't need to see me painting this in real time. So like I say, I'm just going up to the texture, and I am actually going to go over the texture slightly just so that I don't have any areas white lines, because the paint actually wipes off quite easily from the texture that we've applied. So I'm just going to go around and just paint all of those areas. So once that first side is painted, I'm now going to start adding some colour to the other side. And what I've done is I've just watered down the black paint so that I've got more of a wash. So I'm going to wash it all over the texture because I want it to fall in between all the creases and crevices of the texture. Now it paints on quite smooth here. Now what I've found that the paint doesn't stick too well to this texture as is. I would probably have to add a medium of some description if I wanted to paint this. So I'm just adding a wash of the black paint all the way around, and then I'm going to wipe that off with a damp rag. Now before I wash that off, I'm also using the same watered down acrylic paint on the rest of the vase just to give it a more of an aged look. So as you can see, I'm just going over the surface with the watered down paint. It was more just a dirty brush. I'm just going over with a dirty brush and just allowing the dirty water to colour the rest of the vase. And as you can see, the texture is starting to stand out. So where it's wiped off, you see the texture because the vase behind it is being tinted with the colour. So when I come to wipe all this off, you'll see a massive difference between the two areas of colour. So now I'm just going to add the dirty water all the way around on the rest of the vase. Being careful to make sure that I've got in between all the creases, and I'm also using a paper towel to wipe some of that excess off the texture just so I can see where I'm working. Now there's plenty of water on the brush here, so I'm letting it run down onto the rest of the vase, and it helps it to blend also, so we don't see any brush marks on the vase as well. And then I'm just going to continue around just adding the dirty water to the vase just to muddy this up a little bit, because it's got nice texture already. It doesn't really need a great deal of colour. So I'm just going to continue adding more water, and the water will lift the paint off the epoxy texture, and then I'll just spread that around. So what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of contrast between the edge of the texture and the edge of the vase, just so that that stands out a little bit more. So by me using a wet brush, this is actually pulling some of that paint up from that texture, and then I'm darkening the other areas just to give it a little bit more contrast. So I'll just keep going around, just adding water. So there's no paint added to this at all, it's just the paint that's been lifted up off the epoxy texture, and it's lifting and then tinting the rest of the vase. As I mentioned earlier, the paint doesn't stick very well to the texture paste, so it's quite easy to come off with just a little bit of water. So just by adding a touch of water in there, it lifts off very easily with a brush. So you could use a rag if you wanted, but I like the fact that I'm still seeing a little bit of the texture, of the colour behind the texture, which is helping it to stand out. So I'm just going to go around and continue doing this until I'm happy with how it looks. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video and it's given you some ideas for your own textural vases. If so, please give it a thumbs up, or better still, subscribe to my channel. I'll be bringing you some new ideas very soon. So until then, bye for now.